Hi, and welcome to How It Works with Holger. Today we will continue building the image gallery web design that we started in another video, or another video series, I should say. I split it up into two. And this time we're going to look at two more concepts. One is searching using an API, and the second one is paging. I don't want this to be cryptic, so I'm going to show the current state of the application that we built. And then I'm going to show the state that we want to get into, the stuff that we're going to develop today. We simply created an application, a web application, where I can click on Fetch Images, and we use the Pexels API. Pexels is a free image service available on the internet. You can look for images, and as I said before, I do not want to recreate this web page. I just want to show you how you can work with an API, how you can implement things like searching, paging. These are concepts that you will need with your own APIs, that you work with in your own web projects. And obviously, in order to keep this short, I want to focus on the web design and on the integration of the API. So the Pexels API, which you reach with pexels.com/API, is perfect for this. It has great access that you can get a list of images, curated images, popular images, even videos are possible. I might do future videos where we embed videos in web pages, so stay tuned for those. However, let's focus on the project at hand. So this is the end result. We have a search field, and everything is going to be responsive. That means I can resize this dialog as much as I want. And we already implemented this. If I click on curated, this is what we implemented already. But I can also click on popular, then I get the popular images, or I can type in a keyword baseball, for example, and I get baseball related images. And best of all, we're no longer just going to get the best, 12 images. I can click on next and I move to the next page. And the navigation is not static, because if I have a previous page, I see the previous button. And if I don't have a previous page, because I'm on page one again, I don't get it. And the same will hold true for next. However, there's literally so many images available for this keyword. I think if we search for something like Delphi, for example, there's not as many images, correct? So there's no navigation at all, because there's only 6 images in total that match this. So if I'd say, for example, Greece, I should get to here. This is the popular Delphi related image, of course. I get multiple images. And again, I bet there is dozens of them, so I won't reach the end. So the next button will always be visible. However, our functionality will take care of that. If there isn't another image available, or another page, I should say, then we won't see the next button. That is all going to be fully implemented. So let's review what we have implemented so far. We created a main form, and on the main form, we didn't have any components. We only had the fetch button for the interaction with our code. We have a request, an HTTP request, which issues a GET request to, where to? Well, let's see what happens if we fetch the gallery. We set the response type to JSON, and we get 24 images for the curated URL, meaning curated pre-selected images. We also needed to transmit an authorization key in order to authenticate. This is all explained in great detail in the previous videos. Also, what we did, we built the image gallery. We learned how we can create this image gallery using HTML, and then how to implement it in a dynamic way using TMS WEB Core to create or to display the images that we retrieve from the Pexels API. I always want to say pixels, because obviously images are built out of pixels, but it's called Pexels. So if I flip again, don't worry, I know it's Pexels, you know it's Pexels. And we can go on. So the image gallery component, so to speak, builds the image gallery. And this is what we'll keep using. The only thing that we'll change in this video is we need multiple endpoints, because if we look at the example in the finished example in the web browser, we need not only use the endpoint to retrieve the curated images, we also need an endpoint for the popular images, and we need the endpoint for searching with a keyword. And of course, this is something we need to read from the document page. We need to be able to read this value and pass it into our code. There's multiple ways to do this. I'm going to use the TMS WEB Core way by dropping a component on the component designer and linking it to the HTML element. And that is actually the first thing we have to do. We have to build the design for this. We will have to build the design for the text input and for the 3 buttons. And then here, the navigation is also something we have to build. Both of them are really, really straightforward, because if we go to Get Bootstrap, go to the documentation and select input in the form. So we go to Overview of Forms, and there we can go to buttons. That's actually the category that we need. If I can find it here, components, buttons. And we can have buttons that are separated from each other. We can have outline buttons, different sizes, but there's also button groups. And I hope I picked the right category that they're being shown here. Of course they're not, you know. It's so we have lots and lots of buttons, but let's see. Again, I won't cut this out because I want you to see while you watch these videos that even though I've been doing Bootstrap now for a couple of years, I've worked with this documentation over and over again. I've done trainings and seminars, but still, this is how it goes. This is the chore as a software developer. And these documentations change too. So what I was looking for most likely is the input group right here. Yes, that's what I was looking for. And we see right away that here we have an input field and it's combined with another thing here. But this is static text. And I want something where we have an input group where I can click on it. And if we scroll down, button add-ons, here it is. So we have where we can type a name and then here click on a button. So what we want here is like search term and button. And we don't only want one button, we want multiple buttons. And this is exactly what we see here. Button 1, button 2. And this is the cool thing about HTML and how this documentation is built. We can actually just copy paste this and use this in our own design in order to create our layout, so to speak. The only difference is we have to add one more button. The button 1, 2, 3, and I literally used the same layout. Button outline secondary is this here, and this is exactly what I use, button outline secondary, to get this appearance. So honestly, this is what I copy pasted into the layout in order to get the appearance for this input. And of course, I had to embed it into the container and into the grid structure of our page so that we have a responsive behavior. So let me change the size of this and then go here to show you. See, this is always, and now it is full screen. It goes from the very first of the page to the last, but as soon as I make it a little bit bigger, it jumps and stays in the middle and doesn't fill up the whole screen, because that would look ugly. You know, if it gets too wide, your eyes would be straining, because like if you enter a text here and the button would be on the other side of the page, that would not be a good user experience. You might even make them smaller the bigger the screen goes. I just had like one breakpoint. You could add another one if you wanted to. So with this, we have responsive behavior and we know what the layout is going to look like. Obviously, I'm going to show you the HTML in detail, don't worry. And with regards to the navigation, again, documentation, I picked it here, and then it's not a nav bar, it is under paging. Where is the paging? Pagination, that's where it is. And this is exactly what I used, previous and next. So I copied this and inserted the classes. And the difficulty here would be if we wanted to have numbers. And with regards to the Pexels API, as we can see, if we look at the search, for example, let's see, search for photos, we do get the current page, we get how many pictures are on the page, and we get the amount of total results. So we could calculate the number of pages and then generate direct jumps for these pages. But as you can see right here, it's 10,000. So assume we show 10 pictures per page and we have 10,000 total results. It does not make sense to provide a pagination like this. You could, of course, provide a pagination where you say, okay, I put the current page in the middle. On the left, I generate 5 to the left, 5 to the right. That is in your purview. I won't meddle with that. I just opted, in this case, for the implementation of just using next and previous. Obviously, you could do +10, -10, and stuff like that. This is something you could do. I just implemented next and previous, but it will be very, very simple for you to add different stages for the different pages if you wanted to. It's not tied to this particular previous and next. You can easily extend it, as you see in the documentation. Because adding a page to the navigation, let me just go on the lightning here. This is so cool. I love that everything on the web is live nowadays. So go to full screen. The documentation actually provides us with a means to change this. So this is what you could do. You could V4, and now this is how it looks, right? But nobody tells us not to do this. This is what we will do in our application, previous and next. And what the application needs to do is it needs to create the nav element, it needs to create the UL element, and then previous and next will be the LIs, but only if there is a previous page and if there is a next page. Those are the two things we need to add to the design of the page. And let's start with that. We go to the main form, main HTML, and right now we just have the button to fetch the images. So that definitely has to go because we want to use a completely different approach now. We want to use different images. So the row most likely can stay. So I keep the row in there. The layout that I propose is completely based on the documentation. Let me paste that in here. So we have the row stays. And then, as previously presented, we have 12 columns of the available 12. If it is a small device, if it is a large device, I want to use 8, and I want them to be in the middle. So what I have to do, I have to make the left 2 and basically an offset. Another opportunity, what you could do is you could align the columns in the center. That is a different approach that you can say, hey, align everything I have in the center. So you still would just say, hey, only use 8. You would get rid of the offset and align everything to the center. That's a different approach. I prefer using the offset of the 2 to make sure that 2 of the columns are empty to the left. It's preference, whichever approach you take. And then we start the input group. And on the bottom, we want like a margin of 1. Top is fine because at the top of the page. And then we start with an input control right here. And that is the text which searches for the images. And then 2, 3 buttons. 1, 2, 3 buttons. And each of the buttons uses button. Button outlines secondary as a color. And then secondary means it's a light gray. It's not prominent, you know. And then we have the search button with the ID button search. We have, and this is something I have in there, which we will implement with TMS WEB Core. We would have to define on-click events when somebody clicks on the buttons. So the designer that I use, Visual Studio Code, automatically added the on-click events there. That is something that we will provide using TMS WEB Core because we will drop these buttons on the form and then bind them to the HTML elements. So we save this Let's run this. And nothing should crash, even though we didn't update our designer reference. The only thing what happens is, this is our button right here, this thing. So if we click it now, this is where the functionality comes from. Because what happens is we tied it to an element ID that no longer exists. So TMS WEB Core is kind of stumped and says, what am I supposed to do? So TMS WEB Core generates the button. It doesn't have a caption. It doesn't have a height really, because it was tied to the HTML element previously. So nothing useful really, but if you are able to click on it, the functionality is still there. But as you can see, we have wonderful buttons right here. What does not work, there is no images, right? Because if you look at my finished examples, there's little icons here. And that's pretty simple. In my web design, I use, if we go to the web design, I use Bootstrap images. However, we're not using Bootstrap images yet, or icons, I should say. So we go to the code, and here, and then we go to the documentation from Bootstrap, click on icons, go to install, and if we get there somehow, I really, really dislike the layout of this page, because when you scroll down, you get lots and lots and lots of icons, and you never seem to get there. I really don't like this design. So we go to the CDN right here, copy, and a note for people in the European Union. This is, of course, being downloaded from servers that might have an effect on your data privacy. So maybe you will have to download the latest zip. I don't know the legal aspects, what the current law is. I also don't know what the law in your particular state or country is when it comes to using CDN, content delivery networks. For me here in Florida, in the United States, this is the best bet. I use a server that is provided by somebody that keeps updating these things, so I can include these into my HTML. However, there might be implications to your data privacy, how you have to inform your customers that you download content from servers that are not on site from your company. That might be something to consider. I just wanted to put this in this particular video once. I will not mention it again because I'm not a legal expert. Still, I wanted to mention it. Going from here, now we have it in the clipboard, I can just paste it, save. And again, to show you what makes these icons appear, these tags here, the I, usually italic, is being used for icon, and then you have the Bootstrap icons BI, and then which one. And if you wonder how did I find them, there's a video on this very channel that explains them in detail, but I can just search. For example, if I type in search, I get all the different search icons, like, I get all the likes, or heart, I get all the different heart icons. So there's lots and lots of variety there. Alternative is Font Awesome. I wanted to mention this too because I'm always a proponent of Bootstrap icons here because it's tightly bundled to Bootstrap. But there's also other icon libraries which you can use for free, and at least if it's the standard or solid or whatever they call it library. So these kind of like icons, because the ones that cost money are the ones that have like multiple shades and these kind of things. But these are certainly more variety, more icon styles. But there's also a non-free, as you can see here. So 2,000 are free and open source icons of the 30,000. And with Bootstrap, you get 2,000 icons, which are all free, and you can include them as you like. You can also download them as a vector, for example, which is, again, data privacy. I said I won't mention it again, but that might be an aspect that you can include them as a downloadable font or vector. So these things are important, and Font Awesome has 30,000 icons, and Bootstrap icons has 2,000. And if you use them like I do by reference, it's very, very easy to incorporate them in your web designs. So back to our actual application of this one. This is the old version. Let me compile it again. Now that we have updated the index.html file, we now reference the Bootstrap icons, and there we go. We have the different icons in there. With that being said, we need to now tie the buttons to the correct controls. So that is easy at first sight, but it's a little bit tricky because you never really know. And I've mentioned this to the engineers at TMS. We have this button here, and right now it's tied to an element ID that no longer exists. If I click on the arrow, I can make it exist again. So this is the curated functionality that we implemented, but I have no chance because I can't have a caption. If I have a caption in here, that overwrites my caption that I have in the HTML. And so I leave the caption out. I also don't want any element class name in here because, again, that might overwrite what you have in your HTML. So be very, very careful what you put in here. Sadly, with some components, it's try and error, which is going to be used from your object inspector and what is being used from the HTML. TMS is very, very appreciative because these kind of things require feedback, how you use these components in order to figure out what default values make sense. So this, I wouldn't consider this a bug. This is literally something that you have to use and then give feedback if the current implementation works for you. And in this case, I think it's rather difficult because I have the fetch button right here. And if I add more buttons, let's say this is the, and again, it sets this to EFS CSS, but it overwrites also the element class. So if I just pick the element ID, let me do that for the popular. And then let's put the caption to popular, for example. And then we have another button right here. And we select as the element ID, the search, name the question search. Let's see what happens. The buttons will be connected correctly. That works just fine. But the difficulty here is, see, it overrides my settings that I have in the HTML. What is not being overwritten, though, is the caption. Wow, perfect. I love it. So my feedback, see this, these things work. If you file feedback or if you talk to a software company like TMS and you have constructive criticism or feedback, it doesn't even have to be considered criticism, they will listen to you. This is one of these examples where I said to the team in an email to support@tmssoftware.com, and I provided, this is the number one thing you have to consider, you have to provide a project that they can open on their computer. If you say, on my computer it doesn't work, it is very hard for them to reproduce, right? You have to put basically yourself into their shoes. And I built a project where it was clearly visible that my captions were not, basically were overwritten that I had in the HTML. And that made development with button difficult. And I had all the buttons empty, but now I can literally say this caption here is curated, and I can really then see in my design here in the form designer which button is which. And in addition to that, I keep the settings that I have in the HTML, but not the ones in the element class name. So I remove them here. And so I have to press del and enter. Let me run this again. And now I should have the appearance from the HTML. Perfect. So this is exactly the look and feel that I want. And if I click on curated, I have the functionality again. Of course, search and popular I didn't implement yet. I didn't define an on-click event, so that's not working yet. So now we have, with the new design, everything working. The next step is obviously to hook up the other buttons, because right now only the curated button has any functionality. If we look at the events, that's what we set up. And now if we click on the popular, and I also noticed that I haven't named those buttons yet in Delphi code. So what I do is button popular, and then this one is button search. And this is completely separate from the HTML. I just wanted to point that out. This is how you address the components on the form designer that are linked to your HTML. And that also means that the components can have a completely different name than the element ID if you wanted to. These don't have to be the same. The element ID can be something that you get from a web designer that has a completely different naming scheme than you have in Delphi. Fine, don't worry about it. Just worry about your code, your side of things, which means you can use your style. I use button search. Other people use BT, or if you might use your native language in order to express it, This is all in your hands. The important thing is that the element ID points to the HTML. So button search has to be somewhere, if you go into your HTML, on a button. So in this case, if we look here, this button right here. So this button element is referenced by the button that is on the form. And whenever you do something in code with button search, that affects the HTML element that's on the form as well. So it's really strongly tied to that HTML element. So we have the search button, btn search, btn popular, and we have btn curated. The thing is, everything does the same, right? Everything literally will more or less fetch from the API and ask the image gallery to be built. The only difference is the URL is different, right? So it would make sense to basically use this here to get the data from the API, or actually this here, and just have the URL as an input value. That would make sense, right? So that's exactly what we're going to do. So the fetch gallery is going to get a URL as a parameter. And you could also put this in a data module. I pointed this out the last time. So now I would have to update my procedure down here. However, I have MMX installed, so I can simply press Ctrl-Alt-Y, and that will go through my code and update it. So wonderful plugin by Uwe Rabe. It's available for download for free, so don't hesitate to get it, okay? It's really, really useful. So fetch gallery now takes the URL, so request URL is no longer hard-coded here. It's literally a URL. And then we get the authorization and all that kind of stuff. We built the big gallery for it. Perfect. So the next thing is we need to adapt our Pexels API types library or unit to add the other endpoints that we want to use. So we have for the curated URL this one right here. And believe it or not, the one for the popular is just as easy. So we can say class function popular URL. And again, a images per page, paste. And the only thing that changes is the popular here, that it's no longer curated. For the search, it's also just replacing things inside of the URL. However, there is one minor caveat to the whole thing. There might be special characters that people enter into your URL, so you might have to encode the URL a little bit differently so that special characters and stuff get translated. I have not implemented that so far, and it works fine. However, if you have some people there that enter plus signs, equal signs, and these kind of things, or backslashes, slashes, you obviously need to escape them. So to keep this example simple, I left it out at first, but we might have to add that later on in order to make the code more robust. So with regards to here, class function search URL, again, a images per page, integer, and we make this 12. And because this is the default that we want to use, we have to put that one at the end. So the a search term has to go first. Otherwise, you can't use defaults if they are not at the end in Delphi. Okay, so search URL, implemented right here. By the way, I also moved the key into a different unit. This thing has been the vein of my existence. Whenever I recorded this, it popped up. Honestly, just while I moved my mouse, it just popped up again because the Delphi IDE resolved Pexels _key and showed it in a hint window. So don't do this. Don't create an extra unit for it. That's overkill. It's also bad architecture just to have a unit with a constant in it. But this is necessary for me to record this video without having to blur certain stages when I move and navigate inside of the code. This makes my life easier. That is not something you should need to do when you write your code. I just wanted to point that out. So same thing here. We copy paste and we change this to search. And we can leave 8 images per page, but the search term goes in there first, and we simply put this as the first parameter, query equals s, and then an ampersand connects the two. And believe it or not, that works, even though I'm not encoding the URL or whatever. So for simple examples, it works. You might have to escape certain characters in there to make it more robust, but for this simple example it will work. Okay, one more thing. This is query. There was a typo in there. I should correct that. Obviously the compiler can't catch something like that, so you have to be aware of these things. So back to the main form. Now we have the fetched gallery with a URL that builds the gallery. So now for the button fetch, that is no longer really a good name for it. We name it name button curated. Forgot to rename it. Double click, button curated click, does fetch gallery, and the URL is tpexels URL dot, well, then we use it tpexels API dot, and then we want the curated URL endpoint with 12 images. The default is perfectly fine. And then with regards to the next button, we double click on the popular button, which implements the onClick event here. And I can literally copy paste this from above. And I use the popular URL. And now with regards to the search, I use the search URL, right? Well, there is one problem here, because the search URL also requires a search term, which I don't have yet, right? So the easiest thing to get this is to else search term, to have a variable var else search term string. The easiest way to get this is by reading it from the DOM, right? Document get element by ID, or get HTML element by ID. Perfect, get element by ID. The ID name in this case is what, and this is where it starts. So we go to here, and it is txt keywords. So you type here txt keywords, and then dot value. We don't have a value. Yes, the problem is we need to cast it now. We need to cast it to an HTML. So it's a TJS HTML, and we have input elements like so. If you, whoopsie, and if you cast it to that, you have value, and that returns the string. That will be the string that is entered in there. So you could literally say now if else search term is empty, is false, or if not, then begin. So basically, only if something is entered, you want to search for something. This is the first implementation. Okay, and with this, we might think we're done, but we're not, because we have in our code right now that we add the authorization header whenever we fetch. So my recommended thing to do is, and I noticed this while running this for the first time, that we initialize the request when we launch our application. So when we go into the form create, we add init request, which we define as a private method. And there we move the configuration for our request response type. We clear the headers and we add the authorization. That is very, very important, because otherwise, if we run this multiple times, we keep adding the authorization header, and that seems to confuse the Pexels API. Also, something that I get hit by constantly when working with Chrome, because Chrome caches everything. So make sure when you click on popular that you go in the developer console onto the network tab and really see popular per page 12 with a 204 means it comes from the cache. That is the, 200, here it is, that it really gets retrieved from the web page. If you have something in the cache, you can right click here and say empty cache and hard reload. Very, very important. I get hit by that all the time. But even though this already gets retrieved from the disk cache, so because I've just shown this basically to myself while preparing for this session here to record it, this is literally coming from the cache. So there is here the checker disable cache, and if I do it now, it's being retrieved from the API actually, or not from the cache. So make sure that you have disable cache checked here in the developer console. And also when you start up the application for the first time, right click here and empty cache and hard reload. This has nothing to do with the URLs here in the browser. This is literally the cache that your JavaScript gets reloaded from the hard disk, so to speak, from the web server, because otherwise you might be working with an older HTML or an older JavaScript, and then you end up with functionality that's really, really strange, to be honest with you. So that's something you need to do. However, we have a tiny little bug in here because we clicked on popular. Now we click on curated, and you might think nothing happens. Well, it does. If you scroll down, the images keep getting added, and that is something we can change pretty easily in our component because we wrapped it like this. So here in our image gallery, we get the image gallery, and then we can say lroot inner HTML is empty. With that, we reset everything that is inside of the gallery when we start building the gallery. So with this now, we clear out the gallery whenever we call build. So let's say I have baseball, search, type USA, search, and it replaces the images instead of adding them. So we have 12 images, and it works with popular, and it works with curated. Perfect. So we have the functionality now, but it's not really useful because if we have multiple pages of content, we might want to be able to, is this how I spell spaghetti? Let's do noodles, search. Oh, they don't have that. Okay, pizza. Here we go. See, we have more pizza images. So we might want to go to the next page, and that is just something we can't do right now. So that will be the final thing that we add to this application. We'll add paging, so we can press next and previous to get additional search results. And not only additional search results, we'll also be able to, if we click on curated, to get the next 12 curated pictures.